collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, European reaction to US President Donald Trump's ban on citizens of 7 countries from entering the United States.
This is the European Union, and in the European Union we do not discriminate on the basis of nationality, race or religion.
MEPs firmly condemned the US travel ban and held a debate with Federica Mogherini, the EU foreign policy chief.
The US Department of State has clarified yesterday that the citizens of the European Union will not be affected by the ban, even if they hold dual citizenship in one of the 7 countries listed in the executive order. We welcome this clarification, but let me be absolutely clear, this does not change our overall assessment about the executive order.
We'll talk at length to Cyprus Health Minister about plans for the National Health Service.
You change the foundation upon which the whole system is based and operates. This is what we envisage with the autonomization of the hospitals. This is what we want to do. We want to spin off the management of all public hospitals to an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, which will take over the running of all the hospitals and allow each hospital to operate as a point of sales with its own management.
And hear from the governor of Europe's biggest prison for sex offenders on the novel way they approach rehabilitation.
It's a therapeutic climate, so we actually work hard to deal with each person as an individual and to look at their kind of particular problems. And we have a very much of a holistic approach to how the person's problems are dealt with.
US President Donald Trump's travel ban has caused consternation in many parts of Europe. The European Commission's chief spokesperson had this to say earlier in the week.
This is the European Union, and in the European Union we do not discriminate on the basis of nationality, race or religion. Not only when it comes to asylum, but in any of our other policies. The Commission and President Juncker have consistently stressed our attachment to this principle. Refreshing your memory, in his State of the Union speech in September, he said there is no religion, no belief, no philosophy when it comes to refugees. I would also like to refer you to the European model, our European approach to this issue, to the President's op-ed, which was published this weekend by Die Welt and Welt am Sonntag. And there I quote too, we have to make choices about the world we want to live in. We must choose between isolationism, inequality, and national egotism on the one hand, and openness, social equality, and strength through solidarity on the other. Between regressing and the future. It is by standing for openness, social equality and solidarity that Europe can credibly act on the world stage to find common, forward-looking solutions.
On Wednesday, political group leaders in the European Parliament reacted to the signing of the executive order banning nationals of 7 countries from entering US territory. Most MEPs described the travel restrictions as arbitrary and defying the core values of Western democracies, such as freedom, non-discrimination and solidarity. The EU's foreign policy chief, Federica Mogherini, was at the debate.
As a good friend of the United States, I believe Europe has a duty to be clear, respectful and clear whenever a disagreement arises, especially when it relates to our fundamental values. And we certainly disagree with the executive order issued by President of the United States, as many in the US seem to disagree too. The US Department of State has clarified yesterday that the citizens of the European Union will not be affected by the ban, even if they hold dual citizenship in one of the 7 countries listed in the executive order. We welcome this clarification, but let me be absolutely clear, this does not change our overall assessment about the executive order. No one can be deprived of his or her own rights because of their place of birth, their religion, or their ethnicity. This is written in our constitutions, both in Europe and in America. This is who we are, this is our identity, this is something we cannot forget. The European Union will not turn back anyone who has the right to international protection. This is where we stand, this is where we'll continue to stand. It would not be moral, it would not be just, it would not be legal, and it would not be in our interest. Because this kind of measure has the potential to increase tensions and mistrust among people, among peoples and nations. When I say among people, I also mean among people in our own societies. And I'm worried by the trends we're seeing inside the American societies in these days. And that's why, with a lot of respect, I invited the President of the United States to pay attention to what is happening in his own country.
EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini speaking with MEPs on Wednesday.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Joining us on the programme this week is our Health Minister, Yorgos Pamborides, and we're going to talk about the National Health Service. I think we last spoke, George, about probably 8 or 9 months ago, and you were pretty upbeat about the plans that you had, and judging by the reports in the press the last week or so, are you still upbeat? You sounded a little bit cross with what's going on, because you had said that the plans were in place and the parties had agreed. What's gone wrong?
Okay, well, you have to understand that the stakeholders here are quite varied, in the sense that they come from all parts of the woods, let's say, of the jungle. And we anticipated from the beginning the strong resistance from some of these parties. It was a matter of time before they had reached the level of the political parties. And that's what's happening now. We have an in-principle agreement with the political parties. This agreement was reached by an initiative of the President himself. He took it upon himself to call 2 separate meetings of the political leaders. One was held on the 21st of July and the other one on the 13th of September. And it was agreed that we would all proceed in an orchestrated, let's say, manner to introduce the reforms. Right after that, I submitted the 2 first bills. One was for the autonomization of the hospitals and the other one was for the introduction of the NHS to the Parliament. That was first days of October. And since then we have been reading through the bills at the relevant committee, Health Committee of the House. And hopefully by the end of this month we should be over with the process. So if everything goes well, I would expect the final draft bills to be submitted for approval to the plenary session sometime in March.
But some of the parties are now saying they're not happy and that you need another 2 years to organise things in the hospitals. This has been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back over the years. It really does seem to the general public that it's never going to happen.
Yes, well, let me just repeat what is very well known to the Brits. The darkest time of the day is right before the dawn. So I think we're heading towards the darkest part of the day now, of the night, rather. But I honestly believe that the direction we're following will lead to the dawn.
But we've no idea when that dawn will be.
Oh, yes, we do. Unless the dawn cracks sometime by Easter time, I think we will miss this window.
And then what happens?
Frankly, I don't think that the existing health system can sustain any further pressure. It's already on its limits. We've been operating on extra time for many, many years. It's long overdue. The model was designed by the Brits in the beginning of the 20th century, so it's long overdue, and it outlived itself. We should have reformed it decades ago, but we have failed to do so. This model is no longer sustainable.
But when you say it's no longer sustainable, what crash are you expecting? I mean, people are still going to the hospitals, but they're waiting a long time. The staff in the hospitals say they're overworked. You've got the unions now shouting about the terms of their engagement, and a lot of doctors and nurses also leaving, I think. So how do you bring all this together so that there is a functioning system and one that is a national health service?
You change the foundation upon which the whole system is based and operates. This is what we envisage with the autonomization of the hospitals. This is what we want to do. We want to spin off the management of all public hospitals to an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, which will take over the running of all the hospitals and allow each hospital to operate as a point of sales with its own management.
So each hospital will have a budget allocated, for example, from this central authority?
Correct. It will have a budget, it will have a business plan, which will be approved by the central authority, as you said it, and then it will be up to the management of that hospital to run its own affairs. It will be up to them to identify their needs, address them, give a higher remuneration. If you seek a gastroenterologist and you're desperate to get one, you will pay more money to get him or her. So that flexibility should be afforded to the management team so that they can actually have both sticks and carrots in their hands when doing their job.
All right, but that would mean then that in terms of hiring medical staff, you would have maybe a gastroenterologist at the first hospital thinking, oh, they pay more at that one, I think I might move. So how are you going to keep the staff you need at every hospital?
The employees will be employees of the central agency. They will not be employees of the specific hospital. The flexibility for any extra amounts that may be afforded to the specific management will have a limited application, time-wise. But there will also be flexibility when it comes to the terms of engagement. For example, they will be able to hire part-timers. This is an impossibility now for the public sector. You cannot hire a part-timer to come in and do colonoscopies, let's say.
Are the staff under the new system going to be civil servants? Because this then will be very much tied up with the Presidential Commissioner's civil service reforms, and they're hitting a brick wall as well.
No, it is a prerequisite that everybody who will become an employee of this autonomous juridical person will have a private employment contract. There will not be civil servants. They will be engaged on the terms and conditions included in their private employment contract, which will set out the fact that they will be obliged to work on a 6-day rotation basis, for example, on shifts. They will have their maximum hours of service, their terms regarding their overtime payment, how they get their pay rises and how they get to get higher on the hierarchy.
All right, but you're therefore saying that all the doctors that are currently in the system who are civil servants will no longer be civil servants.
No wonder
they don't agree to it.
No, they have the choice. We're not forcing anything on anybody. Civil servants are secured and guaranteed by the Constitution of their status as a civil servant. So unless they choose to jump the fence and come to the autonomous body, they can stay on as civil servants. But that will not entitle them to the benefits and the pluses that the new system seeks to introduce.
Like
Higher salaries, or higher systems of remuneration when it comes to the calculation of overtime, or access to the university clinics that we are trying to set up, which will give them access to funds for research and development, or access to a bonus scheme, which will be in operation in order to give incentives to those of our doctors who actually go the extra mile to produce more.
And what happens to the pensions of the doctors who are currently employed as civil servants?
Those are secured and are guaranteed. But keep in mind that the pension scheme of the civil service changed 2 years ago, and there is no longer pension for civil servants. So the young ones will have a number of motives to move to the autonomous body. The older ones might choose to stay as civil servants until they retire.
But then you're going to have 2 tiers of doctors, in a sense, aren't you?
So what? So what? What's the problem? Now I do have also 2-tier doctors in the system, in the sense that half of my doctors are civil servants per se, in the sense that they are permanent civil servants, and the other half are, as we call them, by contract. So now I do have a 2-tier system, and it operates.
So if all of this does go through Parliament, and it seems that with the elections coming up next year, a lot of parties are going to be looking for union support, how are you going to get it through Parliament?
Well, tactics are important in politics, but policies are more important. And I honestly believe that the health issue has elevated itself to maybe a rank of number 2 or number 3 on the general issues that people are really concerned with, that political parties can no longer disregard the field altogether. They have to address the point of people's health. They cannot disregard it, and it is imperative for the people, and therefore it should become an imperative for the political parties.
Cyprus Minister of Health, Yorgos Pamborides, talking about the ongoing struggle to implement a national health service here in Cyprus.
You can subscribe to the Cyprus News Digest on iTunes for free and get the program downloaded to your phone or tablet so you can listen anytime, anywhere.
Last weekend there was a conference in Nicosia entitled Sex Offenders, Alternative Penalties, Resolutions in Criminal Justice and Corrections. One of the keynote speakers was Lynn Saunders, who is Governor of Her Majesty's Prison, Wotton, in the UK. She joins us now. Lynn, tell us a little bit about Wotton, because it's unusual, I think, in the sense that you have more sex offenders, or it's all sex offenders in the prison. And so you have a very specialised job, in a sense, don't you?
Yes, Wotton has been a site for people convicted of sexual offences for some years. We hold 850 people with convictions for sexual offences, all male, all over 21.
What difference does that make to your job as a prison governor? Because it's fairly unusual, isn't it, to have just one class of offender altogether in one prison?
Well, in the UK it's becoming more common, actually, because of the number of people in prison who now have a sexual offence. The statistics show that around 25% of the population in the UK have either a previous or a current sexual offence. So obviously we're talking very big numbers. And there are now 8 sites that only hold sexual offenders. And the reasons for that are we specialise specifically in treatment programmes to try and help people to deal with the problems that causes them to offend, and actually ensures that they are safe enough to be let out.
So how do you go about doing that? I think one of the things that you do is that you don't, although you've got only sexual offenders, you don't then separate those offenders into the type of offence they committed. There is a tendency, particularly in the media, for example, and that, of course, colours people's opinions, to think that paedophilia is the worst sexual offence. I mean, are there grades of offences?
No, we don't. Often the reasons why people commit sexual offences are very varied, and we don't see there's a particular benefit on singling out one particular group over another. And in fact, the treatment programmes require people to have different offences so that we can use the dynamics of the group to challenge people's attitudes towards a particular group. So, for example, people who have offences against adults might have certain concerns about working with people who have offences against children, but actually the people with offences against children often challenge the attitudes of the people who have offended against adults.
And the results have been, I think, remarkable.
It's very successful. I think it's a therapeutic climate, so we actually work hard to deal with each person as an individual and to look at their kind of particular problems. And we have very much of a holistic approach to how that the person's problems are dealt with. So, for example, if someone has substance misuse problems or has mental health problems, then we deal with those things as well as the particular issues that they're offending.
And the reoffending is very low compared to the general population.
Yes, obviously reoffending rates in the UK are very high for people with acquisitive crime, 45-50% quite frequently, recidivism rates. With sexual offenders, it depends on who the victim group is, but in general very low, about 7-8%.
And if you get somebody back again because they have reoffended, is there a different approach? How do you determine where the programme, in a sense, went wrong?
I think it's fair to say that the programmes we do are not a cure. Sometimes people, like many things that people will know, I'm sure, with sort of addictions, that the kind of people have relapses and need to kind of get back on the wagon, as it were, if they are trying to get off alcohol or smoking. And it's a similar thing, really. If people commit offences because they're socially isolated or they commit offences whilst they're under the influence of alcohol, then if they succumb to that, sometimes they can relapse. Sometimes people return to prison because of licence conditions and they've breached their licence conditions. So, for example, some people have conditions not to live in certain places or to associate with certain people, and if they did that, then that can result in them returning to prison without actually committing another offence.
You spoke at last week's conference exactly about what, and who were you aiming at? Because I think our prison governor was there, but we only have one prison in Cyprus, and that's where everybody goes.
Yeah, I was asked to come here to talk about kind of what we do with people with sexual offences, because I understand it's a growing issue in Cyprus, and I think the intention was to look at our experience in the UK and how we could share some of that knowledge and experience to help people develop plans here.
And is it possible to use your system, as it were, in a prison where prisoners are totally mixed? There's no separation of sex offenders?
I think it would be more difficult, but I think there are some aspects of the work that actually could be done. And I think some of the aspects of the work would be quite interesting to do on a smaller scale, because I understand there's around 50 people who they're held in the prison here. And I think it'd be interesting to work with that as a smaller group and how you would deal with that. So, yeah.
Could the system that you've been talking about and the group therapy, as it were, and the one-to-one communication with prisoners, can that be extrapolated to people who've done other types of offences? You talked about the huge number of prisoners who tend to reoffend, for example, for burglary or something like that. It's not always, is it, just that they need the money? Some of them get a kick from it. So couldn't that respond also to the sort of treatment that you're talking about?
There are a range of reasons why people stop committing crime, or desistance as it's known in academic circles. With acquisitive crime, it tends to be more simple, really, in many ways. As you say, it can be greed, it can be lack of money, it can be, as you say, people finding it stimulating to do so. And quite a lot of the time, young people particularly, grow out of crime. And that is the main feature, really, particularly with acquisitive crime. People just say, actually, it's too much hassle, getting caught, being sent to prison and so on. So they tend to just give it up, in general. But yes, I think with sexual offenders it is more challenging because they are more complex. And of course the damage to victims, although people don't want their things stolen, then obviously that's not pleasant, but the damage to victims have far more impact.
And is part of all of this idea of rehabilitation, I mean, a lot of criminals don't even think about the damage to victims. And I'm not just talking about sex offences now, I'm talking about offences across the board. Do you think we don't place enough emphasis on the perpetrators of a crime being made very aware of how damaging what they've done, even burglary, can be to their victims?
There's quite a lot of work on restorative justice done in the UK. I think for certain types of offences that can be usually very valuable, particularly when people are confronted with the impact of what they've done on the victim. I think with people convicted of sexual offences that has to be dealt with extreme caution, because sometimes the impact of the sexual offence can be, you can be double the problem if you attempt restorative justice with that, and we are very, very cautious about that. Sometimes that is possible, but it is a very small number of occasions. And I think there is, particularly with people who have sexually offended in the course of their work or in family relationships, a challenging power balance in respect of that, i.e. the victim is always in a less powerful position. And that can be very damaging if that's not dealt with properly. So we're very reluctant to engage in restorative justice solutions for people who have been victims.
Finally, can I ask you again about this attitude problem that seems to permeate society, particularly with regard to sexual offences? What can society as a whole do you think, to try and become perhaps more understanding? Because from what you've said, if you understand the issues involved and the causes, then you can go a considerable way to either stopping them completely or making it very unlikely that they will reoccur.
I think a lot of the issues arise, I can't say about Cyprus, but certainly in the media in the UK, it's very newsworthy, and I think people want headlines, and I think sometimes they don't understand the kind of background to why somebody's committed an offence. And whilst I'm not defending that, I think perhaps understanding that this could be your relative, your son, your father, your brother, and I think sometimes when it's closer to home, people start to perhaps be a little bit more sympathetic that this could happen to them too in terms of their families. But I think sometimes we need to condemn but a little less and understand a bit more.
And that is Lynn Saunders, who's the governor of Watton Prison in the United Kingdom and specialises in dealing with sexual offenders. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.